Thank you, ladies. They have another engagement, so they will be leaving as they go out, but we appreciate their time tonight. Welcome to the Women as Leaders celebrating 95 years of women's voting and the League of Women Voters. My name is Donna Lawfer, and I'll be your moderator tonight. I have been a member of the League of Women Voters since the late 80s when we moved to Overland Park, and I wanted to know how that city worked, and I became an observer, and I know. So in my work life, I was involved in library work at the Johnson County Library for a number of years and was their director at the end. But I also now have continued with the League. I'm coaching states in leadership development. I just spent the weekend with the Missouri State Board and several people from local leagues throughout Missouri working on what things we need to do. How do we get ready for the 2016 election? This program tonight is one of 22 programs throughout the week, sponsored by a wonderful coalition, Women's Equality Week. And it is an expansion of the Women's Equality Day, which will be celebrated on Wednesday, the 26th, which is the 95th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, enabling us all to vote. So during this week, the committee has put together wonderful programs. And I heard on Steve Kraske this morning, he interviewed Jessica, let's see, what's her last name? Neuwirth. And she will be talking on Wednesday night at the Central Library about her book, Equal Means Equal, and there was a wonderful conversation in his program about the ERA. Maybe that will come back, which would be great. So I encourage you to pick up a flyer for that in the foyer. You know, the League of Women Voters was founded was influenced strongly by the passage of the 19th Amendment, and the Women's Suffrage Association in 1920 thought, well, you know, we've got the vote, but the work isn't done. So they continued to develop another organization called the League of Women Voters to help women know how the issues were, be educated about what it is they were voting on, how they get registered to vote, and we're still doing that today. And I want to, Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the president of the Suffrage Association, was the leader in that effort. But we have two local people that also were very influential in that early history. Jane Brooks of Wichita, Kansas, was the first chair of the League of Women Voters. That was a committee of the Women's Suffrage Association at the time. And she worked then to establish leagues in Kansas. And not to be outdone, Missouri had Edna L. Horn of St. Louis, who was offered the presidency of this newly formed League of Women Voters, but she declined and served as the first vice president. And she continued to lead the Missouri folks onto their development of leagues all over the state. I was just in St. Louis this weekend, and they are planning on, in 1916, before the vote was secured, there was a very big march in downtown St. Louis, and they're going to replicate that next year on September 3rd, and are encouraging everybody to participate in that kind of programming. And they have gotten the city to sign on, and the Historical Society, so watch for that in the news. That will be, you could wear that yellow sash to one of those events. From the beginning, the League has steadfastly maintained a policy of not supporting or promoting candidates. We call it nonpartisan, but we find today that a lot of people don't know what nonpartisan means in the younger crowd, so we're trying to say we don't support or oppose candidates. But we are very interested in getting people to be active in their democracy, to vote, and we want them to be informed and to have access to the polls. And to that end, we have continued that work throughout. This program tonight, the League of Women Voters of Kansas City, Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties is a sponsor, and I want to introduce they have co-chairs. I want to introduce the first one, Linda Vogt Smith. And Her co-chair is Donna Hoke, but her husband had a heart attack yesterday, so she is not with us tonight. She's at St. Luke's, so we'll keep her in our thoughts. And then the Johnson County has co-presidents too, so I'd ask them to stand, Ann Norberry and Susan Horst. And we have invited the City Council, the Kansas City City Council. Is anybody here from the City Council? Well, thank you for coming. I'm sorry, I don't know your names. Could you tell me?
Alicia Kennedy, 5th District City Council.
Okay. And
I'm Catherine Shield, 4th District at large.
great, thank you. We also want to thank Reverend Kendall Gibbons, who is the minister here at All Souls, for their support and for the use of their auditorium. Is Reverend here? No. Well, we really appreciate it. Now it's time to introduce our first speaker, and her name is Sandy Prager. I'm going to have her come up. You want to come up to the podium. Sandy is a former commissioner of insurance in Kansas, which you did for quite a while, I believe. 12 years. She served three terms, and she was responsible for regulating all insurance sold in Kansas and overseeing that. And that's 1,700 insurance companies with 110,000 agents licensed to do business in the state. That was a full-time job. During her term in office, she supported the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and she is also past president of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Prior to her election to their state office, she served terms in the Kansas State Senate, and she was mayor of Lawrence and a member of the Lawrence City Commission, and she lives in Lawrence, Kansas, so we're very pleased to have her make the trip. And you want to tell us a little bit about your leadership?
Thank you, Donna, very much. And it's a pleasure to be here, and especially to be able to share the podium this evening with Kay Barnes. And she's provided amazing leadership for the city of Kansas City. You know, I never intended a career in public office. I started behind the scenes, helping candidates, and I got a phone call in the fall, back in the mid-'80s, and someone suggested that I should run for the city commission, and I thought, I don't know. First of all, the meetings are televised, and if you know anything about the signs of the zodiac, I'm a Libra. That means everything has to be balanced. We have a tough time making decisions. So I thought, well, this will be a challenge. This will be good for me. So it was a wonderful start to what has been almost 30 years of elected office, which again, I'm just amazed that it's been that long. When I look back on some of the decisions that we made in the city commission, some of them small by when you look at them and compare to the significance of issues today. But I remember very poignantly decisions to put a stoplight and a stop sign on 2 streets because 2 children had been killed crossing those streets. And those seem like small, but whenever I drive through those intersections today, I remember why those signs are there. We did our due diligence. We didn't just respond to the emotion of the moment. My goodness, those were the good old days, weren't they? But we looked at the traffic counts. We looked at where the kids were living, and we looked at where they needed to go to get to school. And sure enough, there were enough kids crossing those streets that we needed to put some take some action and provide some extra protection. We also looked at the issue of secondhand smoke and decided, you know, we need to do something about that. So this is back in between 1985 and 1989. And we decided that it was the right of Kansans, Lawrencians at that point, to be able to be in a smoke-free environment, especially if they were going into one of our public buildings. And that was as far as we got initially. And of course, now as we know, our state, Kansas, is smoke-free statewide. Oh my goodness, the anger that some people, I have a right to smoke my cigarettes wherever I want to. And I thought, well, you know, what about the 80% of people who don't smoke, who have a right to breathe clean air when they're in a public space? So, you know, the decisions we deal with at the local level sometimes can be pretty immediate, Well, I have one in particular that I like to share with folks. My first year in office, I'd been in office probably 3 or 4 months, and we had a young co-ed at the university who was undergoing treatment for depression, and she was having a really rough time. We had a gun shop close to one of our public parks. She went into that gun shop, she bought a gun and ammunition, and she walked a couple of blocks to the park, and she killed herself. And you know, we thought, how could this happen? Why could someone just walk in a gun shop and be able to purchase a gun without a background check? Sound familiar? We're back to those days now in Kansas. So we decided we needed to do something. We, 5 of us on the city commission, we had an ordinance drafted that said you couldn't buy a handgun in Lawrence, Kansas unless you waited 3 days. So there could be time for a background check, although that was not required. But more importantly, it was a cooling off period, and perhaps if this young gal had had to wait for 3 days, she was in counseling for her depression. You know, I'd like to think that maybe she would still be with us today. So the local media, you probably had this happen, Kay. The local media called each of us, the 5. We weren't supposed to communicate with each other, open meetings laws and everything. And they wanted to know what each of us was planning to do. And it was Wednesday or Thursday before the vote the next Tuesday. And so 2 of them said, well, they were absolutely opposed to any kind of a waiting period. And 2 of them said they were definitely planning to support the waiting period for the purchase of handguns. And I, as a naive new member of the commission, thought, well, you know, I think it's important to listen and weigh all the options before I indicate how I intend to vote. Oh, that was not a very good answer. I was then identified in the media as the swing vote. I got all the phone calls that weekend and the threats. And I was told that if I supported this waiting period for the purchase of handguns, I would never be elected to another public office in Kansas. So 7 elections later, all of which were successful, I like to focus on that because I think it's so important, and unfortunately, I don't think we see enough of this today. It's so important for people to know where they stand, to know what their values are, to know what their belief system is, and stay with it, regardless of the political pressure. I heard one of the members in Colorado who lost his seat, I think a House seat, during the elections last year, and it was over the gun issue. And he said, I believed in what I did. I voted, I supported controls, I supported background checks. If I had it to do over again, I would do the same thing. It wasn't worth winning the election to vote against what I knew in my heart was the wrong way to vote. So, you know, I think it was such an incredibly valuable lesson to learn early in my career in public office, if that's what it is, after 30 years, I guess. One one could say. But it was a really valuable lesson. Number one, I don't know how you, I think it would have been very hard, once down that path, if I had succumbed, it would have been hard to stay the course on other important issues. So I'm glad I did, and the opposition that they tried to generate didn't really materialize. I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm going to be pretty blunt here on some of these things, if you don't mind. The NRA is a very powerful force in our government today, and they send out questionnaires. They want to know what your beliefs are on a whole variety of things around guns. So every time I ran for office, I would get the questionnaire, and I didn't send it back. There was no point in sending it back. I was going to get an F if I answered it, so I might as well just save myself the stamp and not send it back at all. So and I'll just use them as the example, but there are many other examples of the intrusion of single issue politics into our political system, which makes it really tough for people to do the right thing. I want to talk about one of our senators from Kansas, Nancy Cassavant Baker, who, yeah, I figured you Missouri folks, if they're, I know we have a mixed audience, but she was widely respected and loved. And Nancy always tried to do the right thing. She and a coalition, bipartisan coalition, back in the early to mid-90s, put together what was called the Mainstream Coalition on Health. Their goal was to get some sort of this was after the Clinton health plan failed. And of course, there was a lot of discussion around, well, we need to do something. And so this was a bipartisan group. Nancy and Ted Kennedy, she always called him Teddy. They were very good friends throughout this whole debate and then beyond it. So they tried to bring forth a proposal that could meet muster, but were not successful. Eventually, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, which we all know because every time you go into a doctor's office, you have to sign something that says it's okay for them to share your medical records. The whole issue of privacy of medical records was really important. But the other real important provision of that, the portability part of it, said that an employee who had insurance at one job could transfer to another job, get insurance there, and not have to go through another waiting period. That was a really important improvement in the whole healthcare system and regulatory system. But it was through bipartisan support that they were able to accomplish something that wasn't, while it wasn't fully comprehensive, it did move us forward. So today, we're still debating whether the Affordable Care Act was a good thing. It passed with, if you all remember, with no Republicans voting for it, to the point that I know several Republican members of Congress, Senate, wanted to support it, but were sort of browbeat into not voting for it because from a political standpoint, they wanted to be able, the members of the leadership wanted to be able to say this passed with no Republican support. There was Republican support, but it was squelched. So then Senator Teddy Kennedy passed away. Scott Brown, Republican, was elected, so the Democrat members of the Senate only had 59 votes. They couldn't move a change forward. They had to go with the law that was passed, which is part of the issue that we're dealing with today. There are parts of the Affordable Care Act that could be improved upon, but it passed. They couldn't come back and fix it because because they didn't have the votes. They didn't have the 60 votes needed to move it forward in the Senate. So we're still debating over whether or not we should have, no, the Affordable Care Act should have passed. In addition to that, we have this, had the Supreme Court decision, which surprised everyone. The mandate, the individual mandate was upheld, and that was the main challenge to it. So yes, it was okay to tell people they need to have insurance. And the penalty for not was would have been enforced through the tax code. But the High Court said Medicaid cannot be mandated upon the states. And so, as you know, Missouri and Kansas have not expanded the Medicaid program. It's estimated that 140-some thousand Kansans, I'm not sure what the number in Missouri is, but I think it's 400?
About
300. So, yeah, that'd be about right, population-wise. Our hospital association has spoken forcefully in Kansas about expanding the Medicaid because it's a job creator for one thing. The estimate is it could create as many as 4,000 new jobs in the healthcare sector and mid-level practitioners and all the kind of support staff that's needed in a clinic. And part of the Affordable Care Act said that because everyone was going to have coverage, they would start ratcheting back the support hospitals get for the uncompensated care. So they're losing that funding. Now, it hasn't started yet because I think with the Medicare expansion issue still up for debate in so many states, they've pushed back the phasing out of the, it's called DSH, disproportionate share hospital payment. But they're already, our hospitals, especially the small rural hospitals, are already feeling the pinch. So it's just unfortunate. And again, when I'm asked why, what's wrong with the Affordable Care Act? What is the debate about? And the answer is simple. It's politics. It's about not giving President Obama a win. And it's pure and simple because otherwise there is no good reason. We're the only industrialized nation on the planet that doesn't have some form of a healthcare system. Nancy Casselbaum knew it was wrong. She worked tirelessly when she was in Congress, and we're still struggling with it today. I don't see it going away. We have too many people benefiting from it, but the rhetoric is still going out there. So I'm just going to finish with going back to my comment about standing up for what you believe in. I can't believe that our members of Congress, and I just heard yesterday, I think their approval rating it's less than 10%. I think I heard 7%. So, you would think they would figure it out. But I can't believe that in their heart of hearts they don't know that doing something to make sure everyone has access to health care just makes sense. It makes sense from a business standpoint so that you have healthy employees. It makes sense from an economic standpoint because if you don't get people the care they need when they need it, then they end up in emergency rooms. It costs more. Their health status isn't as good. I mean, it's just, this isn't rocket science. This is just basic, good common sense. So the message to the League of Women Voters and to people who care about our democracy is we've got to work hard. We've got to be in the trenches. We've got to identify and work for good candidates that will carry forward the values that we care about and not answer to the special interest money that is so prevalent in the political system today. I'm hopeful. I think we can retake our democracy, but I think we're at a time where it's going to be very critical that that groups, especially grassroots groups like the League of Women Voters, gets involved, finds good candidates, gets in there, and as individuals, I know the league doesn't endorse, but that doesn't mean you can't be involved, and I know you are, to find those candidates and really challenge what's happening today, because it's just wrong. And we live in 2 states we all are very proud of. I want to see my state come back and support education the way we've always supported it in the past. Find a solution to those rural hospitals. Build the roads and bridges that need to be built, and that means everyone paying their fair share, which is not happening in Kansas right now. So thank you all, and I look forward to, after Kay speaks, I think we're both going to entertain questions.
Thank you, Sandy. Very informative. Our second speaker this evening is Kay Barnes, who is the director of the Center for Leadership and Distinguished Professor of Public Leadership at Park University. I wanted to say Park College, but it's university now. In 1999, she was elected the first mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, and served until 2007, and she was term limited. During her 2 terms, she's probably best known for the huge development of the Sprint Center and the Power and Light District. And you know, when I think about women in positions like Kay was in, you know, there is no blueprint that you go by. You just have to work your way through all that, and it's wonderful, the decisions that she was able to make. She began her elective career in 1974. She was one of 2 women elected to the Jackson County Legislature. In 1979, she was elected to the City Council in Kansas City and served until 1983. In 2008, she ran on the Democratic ticket for election to the U.S. House of Representatives and was defeated by the incumbent Sam Graves. She also serves as the president of K. Waldo, Inc., which is a human resources development firm. So won't you help me welcome her to the stage?
And it really is a celebration. My mother in 2.5 weeks will be 103, and obviously was born in 1912 prior to women being able to vote at that time. So it's amazing when I think about a single woman's lifetime that started when we did not even have the right to vote. So it's worth celebrating that we are in the place that we are now. As women today, it seems to me that there are so many different topics or approaches that we could consider for where we go from here. But there are 3 cornerstones of leadership that I think are important for us to consider, regardless of our ages, regardless of whatever we are already engaged in our individual lives. Certainly one is to value our unique life experiences as individual women. And as I think about my background growing up in St. Joseph, Missouri, I certainly was engaged, as I'm confident all of you were, in a variety of leadership positions in junior high and high school, and that was certainly an important introduction. I don't recall during those years that there was discrimination against girls running for office or being involved in a variety of activities. I'm sure that there were some stereotypes that were practiced at that time, but at least for many of us, there was opportunity to experience leadership. Another very important experience of staff for the congressman from that part of Missouri, and consequently was spending a great deal of time in Washington. So the summer of 1954, my mother and I spent the summer in Washington. It was a fascinating experience, and because the security was so different and was not as it is today, my mother and I had passes to go to the House and Senate, sit in the balcony every day, all day if we wanted to. Our passes enabled us to ride on the House and Senate elevators. So we were just going all over the place in terms of Capitol Hill, which was a very interesting time. There was a major civil rights debate going on that summer. And also, it was a period of time when there was the McCarthy hearings occurring, and Senator McCarthy was at his prime in terms of doing terrible things as we look back on what all of that was about. And as some of you may recall, at that period of time, his drinking was also increasing, and he was under a great deal of pressure to either get his act together. There was lots of discussion about how are we going to get him away from what it is that the chaos he is creating. So one day, my mother and I got on the Senate elevator, and Senator McCarthy and an aide of his also got on the same elevator. And during that elevator ride, of course, the two of them were paying no attention to the two of us. They were talking about where Senator McCarthy was going to go for 2 weeks, where nobody would know where he was. He was really going to go and try to get his act together. So this conversation was going on, and my mother and I were listening to the whole thing. And lo and behold, he disappeared. And there was tremendous media coverage and lots of conversation about where is he? My mother and I knew where he was. And I think now, if the National Enquirer had existed then, just think of all the money my mother and I had. It was quite an experience. It was quite a summer. And I think liminally, it really stayed in the back of my mind as maybe a place I would like to try to go someday in a different role. Certainly a very major influence in my life in terms of an experience was having a famous relative. As some of you know, my maiden name was Cronkite, and Walter Cronkite was my first cousin. His father and my father were brothers. So I had the opportunity to be around Walter fairly often when I was growing up, and he was already very prominent nationally and internationally. And then also later, as an adult myself, that relationship continued. What I learned, though, in that experience growing up, watching him on television and then being able to be with him personally, was that in my family, it was a good thing to be visible. And that is a major stumbling block, as you know, for many people, particularly women, in running for elected office. The idea that I don't want people knowing about me or reading about me in the paper and so on. So I really value having had that experience because, as I said, for me, I was naive enough to think that it was always a good thing to be visible. And I discovered that most of the time that's true. The other personal experience I had that had a great influence for me was playing golf when I was growing up, and playing it often enough and well enough that I played in a lot of tournaments around the state. What I learned in that experience was how to win in public and how to lose in public. And that was also a really valuable experience that I did not fully appreciate until 20, 30, or 40 years later. So I think for each one of us, you could tell stories about what your personal experiences have been and how they have brought you to this point, particularly as it relates to public service and an investment in our communities and nation. I think another important cornerstone is being willing to take risks. And we all know that to accomplish anything, we do need to be willing to take risks. You've probably taken a number of risks in your own life, and you will continue to do so. And it's easy to run from risk. I know that, and you know that. We all search for security in our lives, and yet that may be a basic misperception. Consider this. Helen Keller had some interesting thoughts about security, and she certainly had an unusual perspective. Could not see, could not hear. Helen Keller said, security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do humans as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And a somewhat more humorous vein, another author wrote, people who bury their heads in the sand offer engaging targets. So again, thinking about my own experiences dealing with risk as mayor, I'm reminded of all of the naysayers that we encounter in any community. And I finally realized during those years that there are 4 categories of people in a community. There are the cynics, the ones who it doesn't make any difference what it is you want to do, what kind of progress you're looking for. It will never, never, never happen, right? That's it. Another group are the skeptics. Those are the ones who may hear you out, but it's just probably not going to work. Then there's the third group, the apathetics. They could care less. Luckily, there's a 4th group. It's the true believers. Every person in this room is a true believer, or you would not be here. Neither would I. So the important thing we need to understand when we look at that reality in any community is you don't have to have everybody. What you do need to move toward is a critical mass. And as people come together who are true believers, who are willing to be open, who are willing to hear you out, who are willing to take an initial step, and the bottom line, willing to take some risks with you, then a great deal can be accomplished. The last cornerstone that I think is so important, I might put this at the top of my list, is to practice hope. Yes, the challenges are real, the problems are there. If we're going to have hope, we need to choose, and I'm going to underline the word choose, to believe that the glass is half full and not half empty. And I say choice because it is a choice. In his classic work, The Phenomenon of Man, Teilhard de Chardin wrote, between these 2 alternatives of absolute optimism or absolute pessimism. There is no middle way, because by its very nature, progress is all or nothing. We are confronted accordingly with two directions, and only two, one upwards and one downwards. And there is no possibility of finding a halfway house. So, practicing hope is indeed the recognition of possibility. That's a profound phrase. It is not one that I created, but I remember the first time I read it, I was struck that the recognition of possibility is an incredibly important concept. So as you think about your life at this point, and I think about mine, particularly related opportunities to be in all kinds of leadership positions, whether in a very small group or in a larger kind of environment, either in the community, within your family, think about the recognition of possibility. What does that look like for you? And how do we each realize that in our own lives so that we do understand, regardless of our ages, that there are unique possibilities we have? Mahatma Gandhi, I think, said a lot to us about how to do that. He said, keep your thoughts positive because your thoughts become your words. Keep your words positive because your words become your behavior. Keep your behavior positive because your behavior becomes your habits. Keep your habits positive because your habits become your values. Keep your values positive because your values become your destiny. Our playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't be insecure around us. And as an author suggested, we were born to make manifest what is within us. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. As women, as leaders, let's all continue to let our light shine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that inspiring message. We'll now take questions. If any of you have it, we have a microphone up here. If you could please come to the microphone so we could hear you.
My concern, my question is this. You both have been leaders in your own time, and I remember both of you in your careers. But I look around this room, and I don't see a lot of young women. And I despair when I see that, because they are our future. How do we get them involved, and how do we make them become leaders?
It's a very good observation, and I think clearly a concern that both our political parties have. I think they know. I think President Obama in his campaigns did reach out pretty effectively to young people, and had good organization that brought out the the issue of education for their young children. We just had a story in our paper this morning. The average class size in some of our schools in Lawrence is 32 kids in an elementary school. That's just too many. A teacher is going to spend all their time dealing with a few of those kids that need the extra special attention, and the rest are going to languish. So I think being able to find the issues that resonate with young people and hopefully positive things. I am a little concerned at the support that Donald Trump is getting, and he's playing on the anger that is kind of out there, and I think there's an opening for good, solid debate around really important issues, around income, income equality, housing, healthcare. But for young people, I think education is an opportunity. It's finding those issues.
It's a new day in terms of younger people. I think we all recognize that. Technology has had a great deal to do with that. Certainly, we don't see large numbers of young people being engaged in either issues or campaigns in the way that maybe more of us were involved 30, 40, 50 years ago. Having said that, however, I think there is a heightened level of sophistication among many younger people based on the technology that has been available to them. Building relationships, for example, with people in other countries. They may never have met the person face to face, and yet they are developing those friendships, those relationships. I see some of the issues, or perhaps LGBT issues would be the most profound one at this point, where there has been a rapid shift in attitude, and a lot of that has been driven by younger people. So on the one hand, I think it is something we need to be alert to, and yet maybe I'm being overly naive about it. I think there is a surprisingly large number of young people who will rise to the occasion and be very involved.
Okay, anybody else?
I was wondering if we can have Alicia Kennedy as one of the youngest people in the room and having just won a seat on the city council speak to that issue.
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, your question isn't picked up by the microphone, so maybe you could come on up. While she's doing that, I may ask a question. Voter turnout is terrible. I know it is. I'm on the Missouri side, but it's really abysmal in our area. And what do you think can be done to improve it? And are you, as female leaders, willing to speak up, become part of the conversation with the public about getting out and voting?
Well, certainly I'm willing to do whatever I can to be helpful in that effort. So let me know if you know of ways I might not be aware of, but certainly I do that almost on a daily basis. Being a professor, I have the chance to be involved with younger people. Many of them are from other countries, and yet I experience with them a real investment in issues. So yes, I certainly am willing to do everything I can.
Well, and I think Kay's comment about hope, we have to give people hope that going to the polls will make a difference. And I think the money that is involved in the political campaigns, I think there's just a feeling of helplessness that it won't do any good because the campaigns are going to be bought and paid for by the big money interests. So we've got to break through that. Nobody voting less than 50%. In Singapore, they have 100%. It's mandatory if you go to Singapore. Maybe we, probably don't want to go there.
Hi, this is Rebecca Richardson. I'm with the president of the Women's Political Caucus, and we are very proud to support Alicia Kennedy in the last election. And as she is one of the youngest people in the room and newly elected to the city council, I was wondering, I'm putting her on the spot and asking her her opinion about what it is that we can do to engage young people, because I know she was very, very successful with that.
All right, and I'm Alicia Kennedy, representing the 5th District in Kansas City. And I'm not necessarily a subject matter expert, but I can share what my experience was as a young person at 35, being elected to the council. I'm one of the youngest women that have been elected to serve in this capacity. But it wasn't easy. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest obstacles that we have for women to consider, to get involved, is that you have to have the courage to step out. And oftentimes we find ourselves in roles behind the scenes supporting other candidates. So that's one of the biggest things, just having the courage to step out. And even though I had served alongside some very strong women, when I went and talked with people about my interest to want to serve as an elected official, it was met with a lot of, well, you might really want to think about that, or this is what you're going to give up to do it, and is it really worth it? You have so many other skills as an attorney. Go make money and give to another candidate. Let somebody else do it. And so all those things are valid, but I think it really starts with someone having a real fire in their belly to want to impact change, because you have to have that to persevere through all the other stuff. Young people are very conscious about social matters. Young people are very conscious of, I gotta work on that being visible part. We're very conscious about social issues, but finding out where you fit in that place is sometimes is not very clear. They don't even teach civics in school anymore, so unless you come from an environment where you understand the process and know how to inject yourself, sometimes it's not really obvious all the time. And so I think young people, you'll see like someone mentioned earlier, you'll see more of us step out as they see, I think this council is probably one of the youngest councils in Kansas City that we've had in a while. So you'll see young people wanting to step out and do more as they realize that other careers may not be as fulfilling, and public service does have more value. And then they see their peers doing it more as well. So I think the combination of all those factors will create the incitement of more young people stepping out. And then another thing I've experienced being a minority, you have sometimes this dichotomy of the old guard and then young people. And so I had to push my way through some of that. And so I had a very contested race, very challenging with someone that was referred to as a statesman, over 30 years political career, and probably been in politics longer than I've been alive. But me getting elected literally by most of the voters in my district are probably over 55, but them electing me as a first-time candidate, a young woman, indicated they were ready for change. And so I think that hope message that we've heard tonight and that we heard from President Obama's campaign resonates still. People want to see a breath of fresh air. They want something new, but it's up to us to empower those young people that have the appetite. And so I had people like Joanne Collins, and I met with Mayor Barnes. I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know the how, and I didn't know what all was going to be required. So it's going to take some mentoring as well. So there's no one easy, simple answer. It's a combination of all those things, but for us to breed the environment so where those that are interested have the platform to do it. And so League of Women Voters and the Women's Political Caucus, all those are great, places to glean and develop those leaders.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name's Jennifer. I was thinking about what people have been saying about young people and getting them involved in different stuff, and we've talked about this tension between like old guard and new and things like that. And I know just in my experience as an organizer that a lot of it is meeting people like where they are. So my question for you guys is, you had mentioned that the way that maybe a lot of women here had engaged in activism is different than the way a lot of folks, maybe my generation or younger or just above, are engaging. And so we've got this gap where because neither, I guess, I don't want to say side, but neither group is using the exact same tactics, so it's hard to relate to each other. And that's where the tension comes from. So I'd wonder what you would think should be done to kind of, we're talking about engaging, more young people or more young women, like to meet them in the middle and, figure out, okay, how can we understand what each side has to offer, and then start, because we're all of us are working. We're all working very hard, but neither side is seeing what the other is doing.
Just one thought I have is that the League of Women Voters, the Women's Political Caucus, would be two organizations that would be in a really good position to set up some dialogues so that there would be that cross-fertilization of ideas and support and so on. And I think that would be a wonderful way to have us all learn from one another, and to also hopefully encourage additional younger people to be engaged in the process.
Well, and I also think, the league doesn't endorse specific candidates, and right now, I think, I'm not sure who the Republican and Democrat Party are anyway. There really is more of a description of liberal versus conservative, and those issues are out there and fairly easy to define. So I think people can get motivated around issues the way 30, 40 years ago. I mean, I grew up my grandmother was an avid Republican, but she would not be today, because I think she would feel that the Republican Party has moved away from her sense of values and what she cares about. So I think we're at a point where it doesn't matter what political party the candidate affiliates with. I think those issues, supporting education, having fair tax policy, the Affordable Care Act, I think those are the things that resonate with people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And mentoring is.
And you have a great voice.
Good evening. My name is Denise Hedges, and I'm the director of a Center for Women's Leadership at Cotty College. And it is my job to work with young women and encourage them to do this that we're all asking our young women to do. And one of the observations that I have when I work with my students is this issue of confidence. And Sandy, I believe you shared in your story, it took a phone call from someone that encouraged you to run. And that is the case. That is the largest thing that young women need, is someone to encourage them to take.
A lot of phone calls.
Oh, there you go. A lot of phone calls. And I think that if we can do that mentoring and we can look for those young women who have that potential and encourage them, that's really what those young women need to step up and be running in these positions. So that I wanted to say, but then I also wanted to just plug that here in Kansas City, this year we're also partnering with the Women's Foundation of Greater Kansas City to offer a leadership program for high school girls right here in Kansas City. And a part of that program is about leadership and civic engagement. So we're building that into our program because it is really important for young women to hear. So that's what I wanted to share about that. But then my question is for you, one of the questions that we always ask our women leaders that we bring to campus is, could you describe for us your leadership style?
I believe in collaboration. I believe in working together. I think when I was in the House and Senate, in Kansas, it was more important to solve problems than it was, who was going to take credit for it. And so decided, we don't like him, we're not gonna do anything to help. Nothing gets done in that kind of environment. So I think being able to, reach across the aisle if it is, find, common ground and problem solve. I think problem solving, otherwise why would you wanna be in public office if you can't problem solve?
My basic style, I think, is also collaboration. I would add that certainly in a mayoral position, and I'm sure you experienced this when you were mayor in Lawrence, there are times when you do need to make unilateral decisions, either because you don't have enough time to collaborate and so on. So a degree of flexibility in leadership styles, I think, is important, so that yes, you recognize that I have this preference, and yet I am not going to be able to rely on it totally. So I need to be willing to take some risks, to experiment, to at times, quote, take charge in a unilateral way.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Okay.
I really don't have a question, but I have a statement I'd like to make. And basically, it was, I remember a play, Laramie, I think, or the Laramie Project. There was a play, and it was a night. I remember the night because the next day was 9/11. I don't know if you remember, but on 9/10, and I believe you were speaking at this event, Mayor Barnes, I believe that was it. And I just remember your wonderful smile instantly when you stand up to speak, and it gives such confidence to all people. And I appreciate that so much, but that's not my only statement. Yeah, as you know, the Laramie Project was about Matthew Shepard and about his death. And it caused a lot of action, but of course, when 9/11 happened, everyone's focus was totally different. So that event was kind of lost in the shuffle of all things as anything. But the most exciting thing to me that has happened in the past couple of years is the fact that the Defense of Marriage Act was defeated, and that, yes, unions, marriages were allowed in the gay community. On that day of the Supreme Court decision was the day that I hung my flag. It has been flying ever since. And I will fly and fly forever until somebody asks me, I suppose, why do you fly your flag? And I just think what a wonderful country we live in. I mean, it's no set thing ever. And it's so delightful to say in the United States today, yeah, we can change, and we can change a lot.
Thank you.
But a lot of it happens with that smile, and I agree.
for their participation in making this event happen, and for the coalition,